During the early morning hours of March 8, 1997, a 911 call was received at the dispatch center in Coldwater, Michigan, that would change everything about how emergency calls are handled in that region. The call lasted exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds. It was played once during a training session for new dispatchers. 3 of them requested immediate transfers to different departments. One quit law enforcement entirely and became a librarian. The recording was sealed by order of the county prosecutor within 8 days of that training session. When asked why, he would only say that some things once heard cannot be unheard. The dispatch supervisor who took the original call, a woman named Patricia Hollies with 19 years of experience, retired early and moved to Arizona. She refused every interview request. But in 2014, shortly before her death, she told her daughter something that has never been made public until now. She said the voice on that call knew things it should not have known. It knew things that hadn't happened yet. And worst of all, it knew Patricia's full name, her address, and the names of her children, even though she'd never spoken a word beyond her standard greeting. Hey everyone, before we dive into this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is one of the most disturbing cases I've ever covered, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Drop a comment with your location and what time you're listening. The algorithm helps us reach more people when you engage, and trust me, this story needs to be heard. Coldwater is a small city in Branch County, Michigan. Population around 12,000 people. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the same families have lived for generations, where nothing particularly unusual ever happens. The downtown has a courthouse built in 1883, a handful of churches, a diner that's been operating since 1952. 3 miles outside the city limits, there's a stretch of rural land known locally as the Barton Road area, mostly farmland and scattered houses separated by acres of empty fields. In the winter, when the snow covers everything, you can drive for miles without seeing another vehicle. It's quiet, isolated, the kind of place where if something happened to you, it might be hours before anyone noticed. On March 8, 1997, Patricia Hollies was working the overnight shift at the Branch County 911 Dispatch Center. It was a Saturday night bleeding into Sunday morning. The shift had been quiet, just 2 calls so far, both routine. A noise complaint around 9 p.m. and a medical emergency around 11:30. An elderly man with chest pains who was transported to the hospital and later released. Patricia was the only dispatcher on duty, which was standard for overnight weekend shifts in a county that size. The next shift change wasn't until 7 a.m. At 2:41 in the morning, the emergency line rang. Patricia answered the way she always did, with the standard greeting every dispatcher is trained to use. She identified herself by her role and her location, asked about the nature of the emergency. There was silence on the other end. Not dead air, not the sound of an empty line, but the specific quality of silence that comes when someone is there, listening, breathing, choosing not to speak. Patricia repeated her greeting. Still nothing. She was about to disconnect, assuming it was an accidental dial, or maybe a child playing with a phone, when the voice finally spoke. It was a woman's voice, middle-aged, Patricia guessed, though it was hard to say for certain. The tone was calm, almost conversational, which struck Patricia as odd immediately. People who call 911 in the middle of the night are usually frantic or scared or hurt. This woman sounded like she was calling to chat with an old friend. She said hello to Patricia by her full name, not her title, not her role, but her actual first and last name, Patricia Hollies. She said it slowly, clearly, with a kind of familiarity that made Patricia's skin prickle. Dispatch centers don't give out employee names to the public. The system displays the caller's number and location, not the other way around. There was no way this woman should have known who she was talking to. Patricia, maintaining her professional composure, asked again about the nature of the emergency. The woman said there wasn't an emergency exactly, not yet, but there would be. She said she was calling to report something that was going to happen. Patricia asked what she meant. The woman said that in approximately 6 hours, a man named David Kohler was going to die. She said he would be found in his barn on Barton Road by his wife when she went out to check on the livestock around 9 a.m. She said the cause of death would appear to be accidental, a fall from the hayloft, but it wouldn't be an accident. She said David Kohler was going to be murdered, and she was calling to make sure someone knew about it before it happened. Patricia's training kicked in immediately. She asked for the caller's name and location. The woman ignored the question. She continued talking in that same calm, measured voice. She described the Kohler property in detail. The white farmhouse with blue shutters, the barn with the fading red paint, the silo that leaned slightly to the east, had been leaning that way since a storm in 1989. She described the interior of the barn, the layout, where the tools were kept, where the hay bales were stacked. She described David Kohler himself, his age, his appearance, what he would be wearing when he was found: blue coveralls and a gray shirt, work boots with the left lace coming untied. Patricia was typing notes as fast as she could, flagging the call as a potential threat. She asked how the caller knew all this information. The woman said she just knew things sometimes, that it was a gift that ran in her family, passed down through the maternal line for 6 generations. She said her grandmother could do it too, could see things before they happened. But her grandmother had learned to keep quiet about it because people didn't like knowing their futures. Her grandmother told her once that knowing what's coming is the worst curse you can carry, because you can see the train coming down the tracks, but you can never move fast enough to stop it. Patricia asked if the caller was currently at the Kohler property. The woman said no, she was calling from home, and then she said something that made Patricia freeze. She said she was calling from 4782 Oakmont Drive in Coldwater, apartment 2B. That was Patricia's address. Her exact address, the apartment she'd lived in for 3 years. The woman continued, saying she could see Patricia sitting at her desk right now, wearing a navy blue sweater and drinking coffee from a white mug with a chip on the handle. Every detail was correct. Patricia looked down at the chipped mug in her hand. She looked around the dispatch center as if the woman might somehow be watching her, but she was alone. The building was secure. There were no windows in the dispatch room. Patricia's voice shook slightly when she asked again for the caller's identification. The woman said identification wasn't important. What was important was that someone needed to check on David Kohler before 9 a.m. She said if they waited until his wife found him, it would be too late to gather certain evidence. She said there would be marks on his body that would fade within hours, marks that would prove this wasn't an accident. She described the marks, their location, their shape. She said they would look like finger impressions on his upper arms, like someone had grabbed him from behind. Then the woman said something that Patricia included in her incident report, but would later say haunted her more than anything else in the call. The woman said, "You have 2 children, Patricia. Michael is 7 and Emma is 9. Michael has a stuffed dog he sleeps with named Copper. Emma is afraid of thunderstorms and sleeps with a nightlight shaped like a moon. You read to them every night when you're not working this shift. Last night, you read them a chapter from a book about a boy who discovers a magical treehouse. Every single detail was accurate." Patricia felt her heart hammering in her chest. She asked who the woman was, how she knew these things. The woman said knowledge has a way of traveling through channels most people don't understand. That time isn't as linear as people think. That past and future bleed into each other in certain places under certain conditions. Patricia made a decision. She kept the caller on the line while using her other hand to radio for a patrol unit. She requested an immediate welfare check at the Kohler residence on Barton Road. The closest unit was Deputy Marcus Webb, who was about 15 minutes away. Patricia relayed the address and asked for him to check on the welfare of David Kohler, possible threat to life. Webb acknowledged and said he was en route. The whole time, the woman stayed on the line, breathing softly, waiting patiently. When Patricia told her that an officer was on the way, the woman said that was good, that it was the right choice, but it wouldn't change what was going to happen. She said David Kohler's fate was already set. She said the act had already occurred from a certain perspective. That time was just catching up to itself. Patricia asked what she meant. The woman explained that some events are fixed points, that they exist in multiple times simultaneously, that what we perceive as future is just another room we haven't walked into yet, but that already exists fully formed and unchangeable. She said David Kohler died in 1893, and he was going to die in 1997, and both things were true at the same time. Patricia said that didn't make sense, that 1893 was over a century ago. The woman said exactly, and then she laughed softly, not cruelly but with a kind of sad understanding. She said the house that became the Kohler property was built in 1891 by a man named Samuel Barton, same Barton that the road was named for. She said Samuel Barton had a farmhand who worked for him named David Kohler, same name as the current owner, and in March of 1893, that David Kohler was found dead in the barn, fallen from the hayloft. Patricia pulled up county records while keeping the caller on the line. It took her several minutes of searching historical archives, but she found it. A death record from March 1893. David Kohler, age 34, cause of death listed as accidental fall. The newspaper obituary described him as a reliable worker, survived by his wife and 3 children. Patricia felt a cold weight settling in her stomach. She asked the caller what this meant. The woman said it meant the pattern was repeating, that certain places hold certain energies, that certain names call out to certain fates. She said the current David Kohler, the one living on that property now, was born in 1963, making him 34 years old, the same age as his namesake when he died. She said his wife's name was Margaret, same as the wife of the original David Kohler. She said they had 3 children, same as the original. She said the pattern was completing itself. Deputy Webb radioed in at 2:58 a.m. He had arrived at the Kohler property. The house was dark, no vehicles in the driveway, no signs of activity. He approached and knocked on the front door. No answer. He walked the perimeter, checking windows, checking the barn. Everything appeared secure. No signs of forced entry, no signs of disturbance. He radioed back that the property appeared clear and quiet, asked if Patricia wanted him to make contact with the residents. Patricia asked the woman on the phone what she should tell him. The woman said to have him wait, that David Kohler would be coming out to the barn within the next 20 minutes. She said he couldn't sleep, that he'd been having dreams, the same dream every night for the past week, about falling, about hands reaching for him in darkness. Patricia relayed this to Deputy Webb, asking him to maintain position and observe. Webb acknowledged, though she could hear the skepticism in his voice. Patricia asked the caller how she could possibly know what David Kohler had been dreaming. The woman said she knew because the pattern was showing itself to him, preparing him, the same way it prepared the original David Kohler back in 1893. She said the original David Kohler told his wife about the dreams, told her he felt like something was waiting for him in the barn, told her he was afraid to go in there alone. His wife thought it was exhaustion, thought he was working too hard. She told him to rest, but the dreams got worse, and one night he couldn't take it anymore and went out there to prove to himself there was nothing to fear. That was when it happened. That was when he fell. Or was pushed. The record said fell, but his wife always suspected something else, though she could never prove it and eventually stopped talking about it because people thought she was mad with grief. Patricia asked what pushed him. The woman was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that was the question everyone wanted answered, wasn't it? What pushed the first David Kohler? What was going to push the second one? She said, there are places where the boundary between what was and what is becomes thin, where echoes of violence replay themselves, where the dead reach back through time trying to pull the living into their same fate. She said the barn on that property was one of those places. She said if you stood in there at the right time, in the right light, you could see shadows moving that didn't belong to anything present. You could hear footsteps on the ladder to the loft when nobody was climbing. You could feel cold spots in places where the cold had no reason to be. At 3:14 a.m., Deputy Webb radioed in again. A light had just come on in the house. Someone was moving around inside. A minute later, the front door opened. A man came out wearing blue coveralls and a gray shirt. Webb described him over the radio, matching the description the woman had given. The man was walking toward the barn. Webb asked if he should make contact. Patricia asked the caller what would happen if the deputy intervened. The woman said the deputy could try, that he could stop David Kohler from entering the barn tonight, but it would only delay things. She said the pattern would find another opportunity, another night, another moment when David was alone and vulnerable. She said you can't protect someone from a fate that has already happened. It will find them eventually. Patricia made a choice. She told Deputy Webb to make contact to stop David Kohler from entering the barn. Webb acknowledged and exited his patrol car. Patricia could hear the encounter happening over the open radio line. Webb identified himself, asked David Kohler to stop. The man turned around, confused, asking what was wrong, saying he was just going to check on something in the barn, couldn't sleep. Webb told him there had been a report of a potential threat, asked him to please step away from the barn and return to the house. David Kohler said a threat. What kind of threat? There was nobody out here but him and his family. Webb said he couldn't disclose details, but that it would be safer if David returned inside. They could talk more in the morning. The woman on the phone with Patricia said quietly, "He's going to go back inside. Your deputy is going to file a report saying everything appeared fine. David Kohler will tell his wife about the strange visit from the police. She'll be confused but grateful. They'll go back to sleep, and tomorrow night, or the night after, or the night after that, David will come back out to the barn when nobody is watching, and the pattern will complete itself. You've only delayed it, Patricia. You haven't stopped it." Patricia asked desperately what could stop it. The woman said nothing could stop it, that the only thing that would have changed anything was if David Kohler had never moved to that property, had never taken that name, had never aligned himself with the pattern. But he did all those things unknowingly, innocently, just living his life, not realizing he was walking into a shape that was already cut out for him 100 years ago. She said some patterns are too strong to break, that they exist outside of individual choice or free will, that they are like grooves worn into stone by centuries of water flowing the same path. Patricia heard David Kohler agreeing to go back inside. She heard his footsteps walking away, heard the front door close. Deputy Webb confirmed the subject had returned to his residence and asked if Patricia wanted him to maintain observation. She said no, that he could clear the scene and return to patrol. Webb sounded relieved. He acknowledged and signed off. The woman on the phone said, "You did what you could. That's all anyone can do. But knowledge comes with a price, Patricia. Now you'll know what's coming. Now you'll watch the days count down. Now you'll wonder every morning if this is the day you'll get the call that David Kohler has been found dead in his barn." Patricia asked when it would happen. The woman said time was flexible, but patterns were patient. She said it could be days or weeks, but it would be before the month ended. March had a specific weight to it, a specific energy. The original death happened in March. The repeat would happen in March. She said March was a thin month, when winter was dying but spring hadn't fully arrived, when the world was caught between states, and those between states were when the barriers were weakest. Patricia asked if there was really nothing that could be done. The woman said she could warn David Kohler directly, could tell him about the pattern, about the original death, about the danger. But she said most people don't believe in patterns like this. Most people think they're in control of their own fates, and being told you're going to die in a specific way, in a specific place, usually just makes people angry or dismissive, doesn't make them careful. Then the woman said something that Patricia would replay in her mind thousands of times in the years that followed. She said, "But I didn't call to talk about David Kohler, Patricia. I called to talk about you." Patricia felt her blood go cold. She asked what that meant. The woman said she'd been very helpful tonight, very professional, very caring. She'd done everything right. She'd sent help. She'd tried to intervene. But in doing so, she'd connected herself to the pattern. She'd inserted herself into the flow of events. And patterns notice when people try to interfere. They notice and they remember and they redirect. Patricia asked what she was saying. The woman said patterns need to complete themselves, and when they're blocked in one direction, they find another. She said David Kohler was always going to die. That was fixed, but how and when had some flexibility depending on what interference occurred. She said by stopping him tonight, Patricia had changed the timeline slightly. She said now the pattern would need something else, some other connection to complete the circuit. She said patterns like symmetry. The original David Kohler was found by his wife. This David Kohler was supposed to be found by his wife. But if the timing changed, if the discovery changed, the pattern would adapt. It would find someone else to be the witness, someone who had already touched the events, someone who had already reached into the flow. Patricia's voice was shaking now. She asked if the woman was threatening her. The woman said no, she wasn't threatening anyone, she was just explaining how these things work. She said Patricia had 2 children and she should make sure she was home with them over the next few weeks. She said she should avoid Barton Road. She said she should avoid taking any calls related to the Kohler property. She said if she did those things, the pattern would likely pass over her and find some other witness. But if she stayed connected, if she kept pulling at the thread, the pattern would pull back. Patricia asked how the woman knew all of this. The woman said her grandmother taught her, and her grandmother's mother taught her, going back 6 generations. She said their family had been witnesses to patterns for over 150 years. They could see them forming, see them completing, see them reaching out. She said it was a burden knowing, but it was better than being blind. Patricia asked for the woman's name one final time. The woman was silent for several seconds. Then she said her name was Catherine Barton. She said she was the great-granddaughter of Samuel Barton, the man who built the original farmhouse. She said her family had owned that land until 1958, when they sold it because too many bad things had happened there. Too many accidents. Too many deaths that weren't quite accidents. She said her grandmother made them sell it, made them leave, said the land was hungry and it would keep taking if they stayed. But selling the land didn't end the pattern. The pattern stayed with the place. It just found new people to pull into its shape. Catherine said she was 73 years old now, living in a nursing facility in Ann Arbor. She said she didn't make calls like this often, didn't involve herself in patterns anymore, but something about this one felt different. She said she felt compelled to call, felt like someone needed to know what was coming, even if knowing couldn't stop it. Patricia asked for the name of the facility. Catherine said that wasn't important. She said this call would be the only contact they ever had. She said after she hung up, Patricia should file her report, should document everything, but she should also think very carefully about how much she wanted to stay involved. She said the report would be filed away and forgotten because nobody wants to believe in patterns like this. Nobody wants to think that fate is real and unstoppable. She said the recording of this call would be played once, maybe twice, and then it would be sealed away because the things she'd said made people uncomfortable, made them question things they'd rather not question. She said in a year or two, Patricia would think back on this call and wonder if it really happened the way she remembered, if maybe she'd dreamed some of it or exaggerated it in her mind. But she said Patricia should trust her memory, should trust what she heard, because it was all real. Then Catherine said one last thing before she hung up. She said, "Your children are safe, Patricia. I looked at their patterns and they're clean. They don't connect to this, but you should hold them a little tighter over the next few weeks. You should appreciate the time you have with them, because patterns aren't the only things that remind us how fragile life is. Sometimes just knowing that darkness exists somewhere in the world is enough to make you grateful for the light you have." And then the line went dead. The call ended at 2:59 a.m., 17 minutes and 43 seconds total. Patricia sat there holding the phone, staring at her notes, trying to process everything she'd just heard. She filed her report immediately, documenting every detail of the conversation. She included the historical information about the 1,893 death, the specific predictions about David Kohler, the address Catherine Barton had given, everything. She flagged it as a credible threat based on the specific information provided. The report went to her supervisor, who read it when he came in for the morning shift. He called Patricia into his office and asked her to walk him through the call again. She did, repeating everything. He listened carefully, took notes, then told her he was going to have someone follow up on the Catherine Barton lead, verify if such a person existed. He also said he was going to request the recording of the call be reviewed by their training coordinator. 2 days later, Patricia was called back into her supervisor's office. He looked uncomfortable. He told her they'd found records of a Catherine Barton, age 73, residing at a nursing facility in Ann Arbor. They'd contacted the facility. Catherine Barton had died 4 months earlier, in November of 1996. She'd been a resident there for 6 years, suffered from advanced dementia in her final year, and had been non-communicative for the last 3 months of her life. There was no way she could have made the call. Patricia insisted she'd spoken to someone, that the call was real. Her supervisor said he believed she'd spoken to someone, but whoever it wasn't Catherine Barton. He said someone was using her identity, possibly someone who knew about her family history, and was using it to create an elaborate hoax. He said they'd investigated the historical records Patricia mentioned, and yes, there had been a David Kohler who died in 1,893 on property that became the current Kohler farm. But that was public record available at the county archives. Anyone could have looked it up. Patricia asked about the recording. Her supervisor said that was why he needed to talk to her. He said there was a problem with the recording. It had been reviewed by their technical staff, and there were anomalies. The audio quality was inconsistent. There were strange fluctuations in the background, and most problematic, there were several segments where Patricia could be heard speaking, but there was no voice responding, just silence. Yet Patricia's side of the conversation clearly indicated she was responding to someone. It looked like either the recording equipment had malfunctioned, or the call itself had technical issues that prevented proper recording. He said without a clear recording of both sides of the conversation, and without being able to verify the caller's identity, there wasn't much they could do except increase patrols in the Barton Road area, and note the potential threat in their system. Patricia felt like she was being told she'd imagined it, or misremembered it, or somehow fabricated parts of it. She insisted everything she'd written in her report was accurate. Her supervisor said he believed her, but he also said that stress and overnight shifts could sometimes play tricks on perception, and maybe what she remembered and what actually happened weren't exactly aligned. He said it wasn't a disciplinary issue, just something to be aware of. He suggested she take a few days off, get some rest. Patricia refused. She said she was fine, that she knew what she'd heard, and she was going to keep doing her job. Her supervisor accepted that, but said if she had any other unusual calls, she should document them carefully and notify him immediately. 3 weeks passed. Patricia worked her regular shifts. She found herself thinking about the call constantly, replaying the conversation in her mind, trying to remember every detail. She drove past the Barton Road area twice during daylight hours, not officially, just on her own time, just to see the property. The Kohler farmhouse looked normal, peaceful. She saw children playing in the yard, saw Margaret Kohler hanging laundry. Everything seemed fine. No reports of any incidents came through dispatch. No calls from that address. Patricia started to wonder if maybe her supervisor was right. If maybe the threat had been exaggerated or misunderstood. Maybe whoever called had been playing a cruel prank. Maybe the whole thing about patterns and fates was just elaborate storytelling designed to frighten her. Then, on March 29, 1997, at 9:17 a.m., a call came in to dispatch. Patricia wasn't working that shift. She was home with her children. The dispatcher on duty received a frantic call from Margaret Kohler. She'd found her husband David in the barn. He wasn't breathing. She needed help immediately. Emergency services were dispatched. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes. David Kohler was pronounced dead at the scene. He'd fallen from the hayloft, approximately 15 feet. Cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head and a broken neck. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental death. The official report noted that David Kohler had gone out to the barn early that morning to repair a section of the loft floor that had been damaged. He'd apparently lost his footing and fallen. Patricia heard about it through the department grapevine later that day. She felt sick. She pulled a report from 3 weeks earlier, reread it, saw that everything Catherine Barton had predicted had come true. The date was off by a few weeks, but the event had happened exactly as described. She called her supervisor and asked to see the body, asked if an autopsy had been performed. He said yes, standard procedure for any unexpected death. She asked if they'd found any unusual marks on the body, specifically on the upper arms. There was a long pause. Her supervisor asked why she was asking that. She reminded him about the call, about the predictions. He told her to drop it. He said the death had been ruled accidental, the family was grieving, and there was no evidence of foul play. Patricia asked again about marks on the arms. Her supervisor said there had been some bruising noted on the upper arms, but it was consistent with him grabbing onto the loft railing as he fell, defensive wounds trying to catch himself. It didn't indicate anything suspicious. Patricia requested to listen to the original recording from March 8th again. Her supervisor denied the request. He said the recording had been flagged as containing technical anomalies and had been sealed pending further review. He said she needed to let this go, that she'd done her job correctly. She'd reported the threat. They'd sent an officer to check, and unfortunately sometimes bad things happen regardless of intervention. He said if she continued to obsess over this, it was going to affect her job performance, and he didn't want to have to put her on administrative leave. Patricia understood the message. She stopped asking questions. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. A week later, she received something in the mail at her home address. A plain envelope with no return address, postmarked from Ann Arbor. Inside was a single handwritten note on yellowed paper. The handwriting was elderly, shaky but legible. It read, "Dear Patricia, if you're reading this, then the pattern completed itself. I'm sorry you had to be part of it. I wrote this letter 6 months ago and arranged for it to be mailed after my death if certain conditions were met. You should know that what I told you is true, all of it. My family has watched patterns repeat for generations. We've tried to warn people. It never helps. The patterns are stronger than we are. But I wanted you to know you weren't crazy. You didn't imagine our conversation. It happened exactly as you remember. The reason the recording doesn't capture my voice is because I wasn't speaking through normal channels. I was speaking through the same pathways the patterns use. Time folds in on itself in certain places at certain moments. I was able to reach across 4 months, from November to March, to make that call. It cost me everything I had left. I died the next day, but I felt it was important. Someone needed to know. Someone needed to witness. You were that someone. I'm sorry for the burden, but now you'll watch for patterns too. You won't be able to help it. Once you see them everywhere. Trust yourself, trust your memory, and keep your children close. Catherine Barton, written November 3rd, 1996. Patricia never showed the letter to anyone. She kept it in a locked drawer in her bedroom. She continued working as a dispatcher for another 2 years, then transferred to a different department, handling administrative work instead of emergency calls. She told her daughter years later that she couldn't handle taking 911 calls anymore, that every time the phone rang she was afraid it would be another Catherine Barton, another voice from somewhere outside normal time, telling her about another pattern she couldn't stop. She said the call from March 8th changed something fundamental about how she understood the world. She said she used to think that time was orderly, that cause always preceded effect, that the future was unwritten. But now she knew better. Now she knew that some things were already written, already happened, and we were all just moving through the pages unaware that the story was already finished. The recording of the call was supposedly played once during a training session in April of 1997. 3 new dispatchers and 2 supervisors were present. According to unofficial accounts, the recording lasted 17 minutes and 43 seconds. Patricia's voice was clear throughout, asking questions, responding to information, documenting details. But the other voice, Catherine Barton's voice, was mostly absent. There were a few fragments distorted and unclear, sounding like they were coming from underwater or through heavy static. Most of the recording was just Patricia speaking into silence, with long pauses where she was clearly listening to someone, but the recording captured nothing. One of the new dispatchers allegedly asked if this was some kind of test, if they were supposed to identify what was wrong with the call. The supervisor playing it said no. This was a real call that had been flagged for review because of technical anomalies. But then, according to the same unofficial accounts, something happened near the end of the recording that caused the supervisor to stop the playback and immediately remove the tape. In the final 30 seconds, after Patricia had finished documenting everything and the call was supposed to have ended, there was a sound. It was described variously as knocking, as footsteps, as something heavy being dragged across wood. And then, very faintly, distorted but unmistakable, a voice that wasn't Catherine Barton's and wasn't Patricia's. A male voice, young, sounding confused, saying only 2 words, "I'm falling." Then the recording ended. The supervisor removed the tape, placed it in an evidence envelope, sealed it, and labeled it as corrupted technical evidence. He told the people in the room that they'd just witnessed equipment malfunction, nothing more, and the training session would continue with different material. None of them spoke about what they'd heard. Within a week, the recording was officially classified as inadmissible due to technical corruption and sealed by order of the county prosecutor. That's the story of the March 8th call. A 17-minute conversation between a dispatcher and a woman who was already dead. A prediction that came true down to specific details. A pattern that repeated itself across 100 years, claiming 2 men with the same name in the same place in the same month. And a recording that captured something it shouldn't have been able to capture, something that existed outside normal time, something that made everyone who heard it understand that reality was thinner and more permeable than they'd ever imagined. Patricia Hollis passed away in 2019. She was 74 years old. In her final weeks, according to her daughter, she talked about the call frequently, as if it had just happened, as if she was still sitting at that dispatch desk, listening to Catherine Barton's calm voice, explaining how patterns work, and how time folds, and how some fates are written in stone long before anyone is born to fulfill them. The Kohler property was sold in 2003. The new owners demolished the old barn and built a modern pole barn in a different location on the property. They reported no unusual incidents, no strange sounds, no cold spots or moving shadows. Perhaps the pattern was satisfied. Perhaps it only needed to complete itself twice, once in 1893 and once in 1997. And now it sleeps again, dormant, waiting for some future alignment of names and places and dates to wake it. Or perhaps the pattern is still there, still active, just waiting for someone else to step into the shape that's already cut out for them. The Kohler family left Michigan entirely. Margaret Kohler moved to Wisconsin with her 3 children and never spoke publicly about her husband's death. Children grew up, had families of their own, none of them ever returned to Michigan. The last contact anyone had with Margaret was in 2015, when a researcher trying to document unusual deaths in Branch County sent her a letter asking if she'd be willing to discuss what happened. She sent back a single-sentence reply. "My husband fell from a barn loft and died. There's nothing unusual about it. Please don't contact me again." But there's one more detail, something that wasn't in any official report. Something that was only shared privately between the first responders who were at the scene. When paramedics examined David Kohler's body in the barn, they noted the defensive bruising on his upper arms, the injuries consistent with him grabbing at the railing as he fell. But one paramedic, a man named Stephen Ortiz with 12 years of experience, noticed something else. He mentioned it to his partner, who confirmed it. The bruising on David Kohler's arms wasn't shaped like hands gripping a railing. The pattern was wrong. A railing would create pressure marks across the entire forearm, consistent with someone trying to catch themselves on a horizontal surface. But these bruises were vertical, distinct, shaped like finger impressions, like someone had grabbed David Kohler from behind by both arms and pushed. Stephen Ortiz included this observation in his initial report. The medical examiner reviewed it, determined that bruising patterns can be ambiguous and difficult to interpret definitively, and concluded that the marks were most consistent with defensive injuries during the fall. Stephen Ortiz didn't push the issue. He'd seen enough unusual deaths in his career to know when to document something